All right, everybody, today we're starting with looking at the biological side of things. And this is kind of our physical side of us. Because remember, in psychology, we look at things that are physiological, things that are physical, things that are cognitive, our mental, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, those types of things. So for first, we're going to be looking at just the physical side, which has a lot to do with shaping and influencing our personality. Um, and to kind of start this off, is we're starting with literally our cells, our neurons. These are the cells that build up our brains. These are the cells that build up our spinal cord, our nervous system, everything. And these do a lot, like they do practically almost everything, in order to help us think, feel, emote, everything else. So a little bit about our neurons, basic trivia. These are the building blocks of our brains and our nervous system. Roughly, we have about 86 billion, give or take a million or two, in our brains that literally just make up our brains. And that's not even counting the neurons that spread throughout your spinal cord, throughout your nervous system, all the way down to the tip of your finger and the tip of your toes. So these things go all over the place. These things help us feel, they help us think, they help us emote. These help us do a lot of stuff. They're very, very important. Now, there's two sorts of neurons that exist. First are your efferent neurons. These are your sensory neurons. These help you taste, touch, smell. These tell you if your stomach's hurting. This helps you if you stub your toe. These help you that, oh, this feels hot, this feels cold. All of those sensations, those are your efferent neurons. Or I'm sorry, your afferent neurons. Your efferent neurons, on the other hand, are your motor neurons. These control your glands, these control your muscles. These are the neurons that tell your heart to keep beating. These tell your hands to flex your fingers. These tell your feet and legs to do what they need to do in order to help you walk. And both of these sets of neurons, they work together in order to send signals, receive signals, to help our body do things, and to tell our brain ultimately what's going on with our body. So that's just scratching the tip top of that iceberg. So some basic parts of a neuron. This is roughly what a neuron looks like. But there are other kind of forms, but for the purposes of this class, this is what a neuron looks like. But again, there are other sorts of neurons that exist within your body, but for the most part, they share the same basic functions. First, you have your cell body, which is what we call the soma. And this is your typical cell. This is the neuron's life support. Keeps it alive, has all the normal cell things that they do. Um, and which is where you'll find that, in the nucleus, like any other animal or plant cell. Now, some things that a neuron has that other cells don't have is your axon, myelin sheath, axon ending, and your dendrites. Your dendrites, your neuron's dendrites, are the part of the neuron that receives signals. Remember that. Your axon is the part of your neuron that sends the signal. That is surrounded by what's called a myelin sheath. And this is kind of a fatty wrapping. Think of it like the plastic wrapping on your electrical cord. And its job is to pretty much protect the axon. And at the very end, you have the axon endings. And this is the part where the axon begins to branch out and comes into contact, even though not totally accurate, but close enough, comes into contact with the dendrites of another cell, of another neuron. So I clap my hands. I feel the pressure of my hands impact. So what happened was when they impacted, a signal from the neurons that are at the outer layer of my hand, they feel that pressure. That signal comes to the nucleus in the cell body, where within there an electrical charge is generated. It shoots down the axon and then goes to the axon endings where it will send the signal to another cell. This happens within a hundredth of a second. So within fractions of a second, that signal is sent. And this jumps through all the other cells, into your spinal cord, all the way up into your brain to let you go, oh, I feel my hands touching each other. And this is kind of how it plays out, because you can have where you see one cell connects to another cell, one cell can connect to two cells, or three cells can connect to one cell. It really just depends. Generally what happens is as your senses connect, because they all pretty much go through your spine, except for your vision. We'll get to that at a later date. But all your sensations and your senses and your nerves and all those other things, in essence, what happens is kind of what happens at the bottom. They connect multiple into less, into less, into less, until it works all the way up to your brain. But you have this little space right here. This part that I'm kind of coloring in right now. This is really where the magic happens. This is the most important thing. And this is what's called the synaptic gap. Now what happens in the synaptic gap, or sometimes called synapse for short, this is the space between a neuron's axon and another neuron's dendrite. So they don't necessarily touch each other. It's like it's pretty much when you have like two little kids and they're like, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, and they shove their finger closer and 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 closer, but I'm not touching you. That's pretty much the game that neurons play. You actually don't want your neurons to touch each other, because if your neurons touch each other, then things wouldn't work. Because what happens is within this gap are your neurotransmitters. And these are chemicals that relay the signal from one neuron to another. And these neurons, or these chemicals, these neurotransmitters, these are the ones that actually tell you what's going on. So you reach out and you burn your hand and you feel that burning sensation. That's because you have these little neurons these neurotransmitters that are flying back and forth through this area and telling you what's happening. And these happens really, really quickly. Again, 100th of a second. They can tell you, oh, I burned my hand. Oh, my hand isn't burning so much. And that's all happening within the synapse. And there are so many more things that they do. So some of these examples of neurotransmitters, and this is a short list. There are many, many neurotransmitters, like I believe upwards of 100. But there are basically, though, all neurotransmitters can be broken down into two basic types: excitatory neurotransmitters and your inhibitory neurotransmitters. Excitatory neurotransmitters are neurotransmitters that rev you up, that rev up the other thing, that in essence excites the next neurotransmitter. So like, for example, I take my hands, I push them together. I feel the pressure. My excitatory neurotransmitters are shooting, telling my brain, your hands are pressing on each other and they're starting to hurt. I let go. That's because those neurotransmitters are no longer being sent out. And in some cases, depending on what's going on, is you can have inhibitory neurotransmitters. They come out and they can calm down other neurons. So like, for example, you have, if you look at this chart, At the very top, there's two neurotransmitters. You have adrenaline and GABA. Adrenaline is your fight or flight neurotransmitter. So if you're walking down the road or you're walking down a hallway and a dude with a hockey mask and a bloody machete jumps out and starts chasing you, you're either going to run away as fast as you possibly can or prepare to fight to the death. Adrenaline is produced in those stressful situations. Those neurotransmitters, what they will do is they will increase your heart rate, they'll increase your blood flow, leading to a physical boost and heightened awareness. All of that is adrenaline. You escape. You escape the machete-wielding psychopath, or you fight to the death, and you win, and you're walking away. Well, what happens is GABA is then released, and this can calm the firing nerves in your central nervous system, and they can actually help you calm down a little bit. And there's some others as well that kind of play into it, but these are very, very very simple example for our purposes. Then you have noradrenaline. This is key for concentration. So when you're trying to concentrate on something, these play a role in that. Acetylcholine, these are key to help you learn. These are involved in your thought and your learning and your memory. Helps with attention, helps you wake up in the morning. And you have dopamine, these are your pleasures. Neurotransmitter. This is actually when we get to addiction, we'll actually talk about dopamine more. Because when most people are addicted to something, whether it be, drugs, alcohol, bad habits, looking at porn, that kind of stuff, most people, what they're actually addicted to is that dopamine hit. Not so much the alcohol, but it's because they're chasing that dopamine hit. You have glutamate. This is another memory neurotransmitter. This is actually your most common neurotransmitter. It helps with learning and memory, regulates your development, creation of nerve contacts. This is actually we'll actually get to this a little bit later in this presentation, but this is actually the neurotransmitter that is very, very key in helping your brain develop. Serotonin, this is a mood neurotransmitter. Contributes to well-being and happiness, helps you sleep, helps you regulate your digestive system. Very, very important. And then you have your endorphins, and this is kind of released during exercise, excitement, or sex. Produces well-being, euphoria, reducing pain is kind of a thing. Dopamine and endorphins are, again, those are the two that are kind of linked mostly to addictions and stuff like that, because they are tied together a lot. But if you've ever seen The Matrix, there's a scene in the first Matrix where Morpheus tells Neo, not long after he's been released from the tank, that the human body produces electricity. This is where that is truthful. Now, it's not at the scale that the Matrix is, but we do have electrical impulses that shoot through our nervous system. And what happens is really this. Your room is shaking right now. There are earthquakes happening all around us all the time. But what's happening is this. There is a certain threshold for which the stimulus, whatever that thing is, a room shaking, a light, hearing things, there is a certain threshold that stimulus has to reach. And if it doesn't reach it, we don't even notice it's there. And so, and it's an all or nothing thing. So what happens is there's some sort of stimulus, and if you look up here at where this is there is a threshold that has to be met. If the stimulus pressing on something, hearing something, seeing something, if it doesn't cross that threshold, you're not going to notice that it's there. When we talk about sensation and perception, we will come back to this idea, but so keep that in mind. But what happens is so let's just say something does cross that threshold, like you hearing my voice right now, you seeing the screen right now, those are crossing that threshold. So you have the electrical impulse, it generates, it shoots, it has a refractory period where the cell kind of cools off a little bit, and then it's back to a resting state where it'll quickly shoot off again. And this happens, this whole cycle, 1 to 2 milliseconds. So a fraction of a second this is happening. 1,000th of a second. So 1 second is worth 1,000 milliseconds. This stuff moves really fast, but we don't notice it. Now, the real magic of neurons is the power of neuroplasticity. I'm willing to bet you've had that moment where you've sat in a class and thought to yourself, why am I here? Why am I learning math? Why am I learning the works of, this weird dude named William Shakespeare? Why am I in psychology class? Well, the reason for it is actually this: neuroplasticity. Because what happens is our brains are not stagnant. They're not still. What they're doing is your neurons right here in your brain are constantly making new connections amongst themselves. Your brain literally rewires itself. Now, it rewires itself when you learn something. So the more you learn, the more your brain will actually rewire itself. And the more your brain is able to rewire itself, as it makes more connections, as those connections become more and more interconnected, your brain will actually move faster. Your brain will process more information. And we'll kind of get to this, especially when we talk about memory and thought, because there's a theory in psychology that's starting to, that's showing a lot of promise. The idea of engrams, and what taking a complicated theory and breaking it down into a small paragraph is really this: your memories are literally stored in your neurons. So your brain cells literally hold your memories. Now, memory is more complicated than what you did yesterday or what you did 5 minutes ago or what's your phone number. It's literally things like, what color's my shirt? Like, you have a memory somewhere that tells you that this is a, shirt's actually kind of a grayish thing, but it may show up on blue on your screen. But that's beside the point. But so you have memories that actually tell you what colors are. You have a memory that tells you what a dog looks like. So again, when we get to learning and memory and those types of things, we'll actually explore that a little bit more. But really the idea is this: the more you learn, the more your neurons become interconnected, the connections become better, and your brain will actually be able to move faster. And that's one of the reasons why you take all the classes you do in high school and stuff, even if you think the class is horribly stupid. The idea is what they're trying to do is they're trying to help your brain form more connections. And again, pretty much the phrase goes, you either use it or lose it. Same thing with your brain. You use your brain to do stuff, you learn things, your brain will become better. You don't use your brain, you'll lose your brain. Pretty much. And last thing is this. For a long time, people used to believe that you were born with the same amount of brain cells that you will always have. No. You can actually form new brain cells. This process is called neurogenesis. And when you're an embryo, when you're bouncing around in your mama's belly, neurogenesis was key for your brain cells to develop. pretty much what happens, long story short, is you have stem cells, and these stem cells can turn into neurons, and those neurons, they build your brain and your nervous system. Now, when you were an embryo and developing, those stem cells were rapidly turning into your neurons. A good set of them. Now, after you're born, what you have are, you still have stem cells, and you still make stem cells. And what happens is really kind of this, and it kind of goes with neuroplasticity, making those connections. If you use your brain, you're constantly trying to learn things. You're constantly trying to learn things that are hard. That's the key. If you're constantly trying to learn things and you're constantly pushing your intellectual stuff, your intellectual faculties, you're trying to learn things that are hard. What will happen will be your brain will look around and go, I need more power. I need more neurons. And some of those stem cells that you have right now, because you still produce stem cells even if you're an adult, those stem cells will become neurons. And those will actually help your brain work faster. In essence, this is actually how you make yourself smarter. If you constantly push your brain, constantly trying to learn things that are hard, you can actually make your brain better and make your brain faster. So now there's one other little component to this, and sleep is important. And when we talk about sleep, we'll actually come back to this. But if you really want to learn something, really try to learn it, submerge yourself in that information, and then get about 7 to 8 hours of sleep at night. Because sleep is actually key to all this stuff. And again, when we talk about sleep, we'll come back to this. But yeah, this is a brief, rough rundown of your neurons and how they work and what's in them and stuff like that. And yeah, that's about all. Peace out.